Welcome to Blockstream Talk. Today we're talking to Bruce Fenton, cypherpunk stockbroker, managing director of Watchdog Capital, and CEO of Chainstone Labs. Bruce is an old school Bitcoiner, and I think brings a really interesting perspective given his time in traditional markets. In this conversation, we discuss some of those nutty Bitcoin ideas that are no longer that nutty, things like hyperinflation, hyperbitcoinization, and Bitcoin's potential role in geopolitics, as well as how the Bitcoin investment narrative has changed over time, and also the opportunities and challenges around STOs and digital securities. I really enjoyed this conversation. If you like it, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Bruce, nice to meet you.
Great to meet you.
Great. So maybe to start off, you can give us a brief introduction to who you are, what you do, and how you got into Bitcoin.
Sure. My name is Bruce Fenton. I originally came from the investment business, which I started, ever since I was a kid. My mom was a stockbroker. So as a very young, teenager, I was working in brokerage firms, and I kind of grew up on the floor of a brokerage firm, literally. So I got my first job there when I was, I got registered. I got my first job when I was 14, but I got registered when I was about 19, or when I was 19. And so I've been licensed in some form ever since, and, worked in a lot of different areas, retail, institutional, kind of all kinds of things over a 20-year period. And then I got into Bitcoin about 2012, 2013. I had been interested in free markets and free market economics and, kind of sound money and that kind of thing just from my job. And I was always interested in new emerging markets and emerging trends and, new places in the world to invest and that kind of thing. So that's what originally brought me to Bitcoin. And, as they say, I think I had a saying of, you come for the Lambos, but you stay for the decentralized, new form of money that can upset these old and broken systems that we have in the world.
I've seen in your writings that you've described like the current moment as a time of massive change. And I think it's not only a time of massive change, but like accelerating change as well. What role do you think Bitcoin and the idea of better money plays in improving the way that the future develops?
Hopefully a big role. I think that Bitcoin is a very, very, very big deal. It's one of the most important and interesting technologies, I think, in a long time. I'd put it, right up there with the internet or the printing press. I'm biased. I'm a Bitcoiner, but I don't say those statements lightly. I'm not a historian, but I definitely know the impact of things like the printing press, and it seems like the internet as well. But Bitcoin is part of that, and but as big as Bitcoin is, I think that the kind of times we're in are even bigger magnitude. We have these times in history where you've just had huge points of turmoil and where everything changes, borders change, money changes, power structures change. And we're definitely seeing that. We just don't know how big of a deal it is, but I am very convinced that it's a bigger deal. It's kind of a once in a century thing, or more. It might be kind of the thing you see once every 4 centuries with like the American and French Revolution or something, or the printing press. But at the very least, it's the kind of change that you saw, you see roughly every 100 years or so, where you have this, this massive turmoil. So I think Bitcoin is probably a piece of that. I certainly hope so. We definitely, the old money system is very broken and it just doesn't make sense. And I can't see it. You can only go one way. I mean, either, has less overall power or more overall power. I can't really see a world where we're like, oh, well, let's just print even more. I just can't see that working. It seems to be, even prior to the current massive crisis, I think back 2008, probably it was the beginning of the end. It was pretty clear this wasn't going to work unless they took massive measures. Obviously, they haven't done that. So I think Bitcoin will be a big part of this big change. And I think it'll end up in the history books. I think we are in very interesting and historic times.
Yeah, and I think one of the interesting things about it and the really optimistic things about it is, historically, when you get to kind of like these fourth turning situations, that there's a lot of blood in the streets. And, Bitcoin has always struck me as a technology that can facilitate a transition to something completely different, but in a bloodless, relatively peaceful way.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's, a lot of the pain and violence and bloodshed comes from money systems. I mean, ultimately fiat, where you can just print money from thin air and pay armies, that's a very destructive thing, and we're seeing that. Um, Bitcoin also has additional properties. In addition to being sound money, it's money that people can hold and control in a way that nobody has ever been able to do before. The closest thing you could kind of do is sort of gold in a safe or something, which is actually quite good. In a pre-Bitcoin world, is quite a good alternative to fiat. And if we never had Bitcoin, believe me, I would imagine I'd probably be a big gold bug right now if Bitcoin would have never been invented. I couldn't imagine having money in in the fiat system. But also the fact that people can control their own money, it makes it harder for nobody can add new money to the money supply, and it also makes it harder for people to take that money. So hopefully that kind of starves the beast in a peaceful way. If everybody just sort of opted out and owned Bitcoin, then the world would be a far more peaceful.
Yeah, I think that's one of the interesting things about Bitcoin is that I think probably since the beginning of civilization, there's been a trend towards centralization. And that's really accelerated, ironically, probably with the internet, right? Like things have become a lot more centralized. And, two of the big competing buzzwords from my perspective in the technology space are blockchain and decentralization on one side, and then artificial intelligence on the other side, which seems to be the main application is for small groups of people to control large groups of people. So I think, Bitcoin is interesting partly because I think it's the first real swift kind of move back in the pendulum, like a mean reversion towards decentralization after, arguably maybe hundreds or thousands of years of a trend towards centralization.
Yeah, it came right into the world at exactly the right time, in an uncanny way, or maybe it's just that it's the time is right for Bitcoin. I don't think 10 years earlier, it would have made sense. And the internet was very different. A lot of other things were different, but this these very unique times that we're in, it's in some ways the perfect environment for Bitcoin. I mean, nobody could have predicted this. It's really amazing.
Yeah, that's kind of my next question. So there's all of these, we're at an interesting point where all of these trends that have been playing out for a long time that I think were already established. Things like inflation, right? Like globally, inflation is the highest it's been in at least a generation. And it wasn't that long ago. Like I can remember conversations in 2018 talking to analysts about inflation and them saying, CPI is low. There's no inflation. But that kind of stuff is getting really hard to deny now. I don't think anybody would say inflation isn't a problem.
Yeah.
And then censorship is another one, right? Like censorship is rampant on social media. It's worse than it's ever been. Censorship through the financial and the banking system, I think, is something that's becoming more and more mainstream and more people are concerned about. And then I think what's going on with this Ukraine conflict and Russia, the sanctions being imposed now are unprecedented, I think. So it feels like it's a tailor-made environment for Bitcoin outperformance. What do you see as the big drivers for Bitcoin? And do you agree that this is an environment that's just tailor-made for Bitcoin?
Yeah, it certainly seems to be for a lot of reasons. The censorship resistance. I mean, it's a world where everybody's getting canceled. I mean, there's people who are just loose affiliates of Putin who are having yachts seized and stuff like that. And that doesn't rub me the right way. I mean, if you're going to seize somebody's yacht, I think that person needs to have committed a crime and been tried in a court and had a jury and everything else. It's a very dangerous world where you can say, well, because who's to say? I mean, who's to say what degree of an associate they are? I mean, for all they know, that person could have been yelling and screaming at Putin 2 weeks ago, saying, "Please don't do this." I mean, and even still, you can't just go around seizing people's yachts and stuff. The world is complex. That yacht maybe have multiple owners, and somebody may be innocent. Somebody innocent is always going to get hurt, even if it's just the employees involved. So you have to be very, very careful about a world where you can just go around taking money. And people get emotional about Putin or any other specific example, but the point is that nobody should really be doing this kind of thing, because as soon as you let one authority figure, whether it's the EU or the US or Russia, an authority figure decide, hey, you did a bad thing and you can't have your money, especially without a trial, that's just bad. There has to be other ways to deal with things and deal with conflict. It doesn't mean you give everybody a pass and let everybody get away with things, but for the same reason you don't have cameras in everybody's home that would theoretically prevent problems, but they would cause new problems. So, the censorship of money is a big deal. I think that'll be somewhat of a driver, and just the soundness of Bitcoin, the limited supply. Limited supply was the first thing that I got that was interesting to me as a financial person, because that is pretty simple. And any financial person, you tell them limited supply, they're going to understand that. And You don't have a lot of that now, especially a serious asset. I mean, Bitcoin's a really serious asset now. So I think that it is sort of the perfect storm for it.
Yeah, and I think interesting the limited supply concept is something that really caught the attention of Wall Street, right? So I think Paul Tudor Jones, was the first one that really came out with that idea that, hey, inflation is going to be a big problem. I think Bitcoin is interesting because it's really small and it could be really big. So it's got that beta kicker to it. It could grow a lot. And then also it's got a lot of characteristics of gold, like fixed supply, inflation hedge. And it's interesting that how the Bitcoin narrative has changed over time, though. Like I have got the white paper behind me, and the title is Peer to Peer Electronic Cash. And then in 2016 or 2017, the narrative shift to digital gold. But a lot of those older narratives, maybe they didn't disappear, but they kind of fell out of fashion, right? Things like electronic cash and then programmable money. And I think, I work a lot on STOs and the Blockstream mining node and those kind of assets. And that's starting to come back. So how do you think the Bitcoin narrative has changed over time? And how important are things like electronic cash and programmable money in terms of the network effects that I think could help drive, Bitcoin price appreciation and also just broader adoption of Bitcoin?
Yeah, that's a great question. It is interesting to have seen the narrative change. I remember everybody was so excited about early retailers, and we had a tremendous success up here in New Hampshire, where some folks right in Portsmouth, where my office is, I think it was. I'm pretty sure at least one point it was the highest concentration. These folks from the Free State Project went around door to door, and they just begged every single business to take Bitcoin, and they didn't take no for an answer, and they got everybody taking it, and there was this nice spike, and kind of everybody knew that, and all the Bitcoiners would come to town, and they'd seek out. There was I think over 150 places that would take Bitcoin right in this tiny town, so they'd go and they'd spend their Bitcoin, but sort of sadly that kind of died down right around when I moved there. I was excited. That was one reason I moved there. I'm like, oh, this is cool. But I honestly, I only did a couple transactions. I think I probably did just a few. It was, and it was kind of sad because a lot of the places that had it, you'd go and they'd say, oh yeah, we used to do that. We haven't done it in a year, and nobody knew how to use the wallets. And so, but there was a few places that still did. But I was kind of sad about that because in some ways it was. I could definitely sympathize with the folks who, like Roger Ver, who he was part of that sort of movement, and he became very unpopular for his opinions and what he did, and a lot of the story. But one of the differences he had was sort of this prioritizing of the cash kind of thing. And I think that somebody like I could sort of sympathize if somebody felt like that. It felt like a little of a failure, to have that. But the flip side argument of that is like, hey, the narrative did change, and you look at what's going on. I think it is more exciting that Michael Saylor, is doing what Michael Saylor's doing rather than the falafel shop. I mean, it's all relative. We're in a much more positive point than Bitcoin was when Bitcoin was at $200, and it's just a different kind of thing. But I think both would be good. I mean, I think it would be great if we just have kind of, maybe we were ahead of the time 8 years ago or so when everybody was talking about doing some of the things that I think Lightning will enable, and just kind of really using Bitcoin. It's crazy. I don't know about most people, but I probably use Bitcoin a little less than I did in the early days. I was always trying to find a way, and I always had a wallet and everything. And I haven't had any Bitcoin on my phone in a while. It's so just things. It's not that but I'm certainly more bullish than I ever have been. And I think it's much more realistic. Maybe at the time, it wasn't realistic to say, hey, we're going to take on the central banks, or we're going to have a new global money. Maybe just getting the coffee house to accept it, I mean, was definitely an important step in that process. But now we do have kind of bigger fish to fry. You have the NIDIGs of the world and El Salvador and, these kind of things. And I think all Bitcoiners are excited about those kind of things. I mean, we're excited about a cup of coffee too, but I think that that's part of the reason, it's a positive thing that the narrative has changed because we've got bigger fish to fry right now. But I would like to see both of them. I'd like to see it used for some of those early use cases we talked about so fondly years ago as well.
Yeah, I wonder also sometimes like how much was the IRS responsible for killing that narrative, right? Because as my understanding is that in the US, Bitcoin transactions are a taxable event, right? So it just becomes a
Yeah.
massive headache if you insist on buying coffee with Bitcoin in the US. So and then my other thought on that would be I think historically like the transition of like how something becomes valuable and becomes money, I think it has to be a store of value first, right? Like
Mhm.
people will only trade something if it's a store valuable and it's valuable first. So maybe that this is naturally the progression that Bitcoin needs to go. And then eventually when the volatility comes out of Bitcoin because it's trading at $1 million, its market cap is huge, then that probably naturally that medium of exchange kind of narrative will come back in full force, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, better money is the ultimate use case of Bitcoin. I mean, that's the 9 billion pound
Yeah.
gorilla. If you make better money, you can make the whole world work better for the reasons we talked about. Better money is a very, very noble thing. And a lot of newcomers, people come right new to the space and they say, "Oh, Bitcoin's 10 minutes, this one's 5 minutes," or Bitcoin can do 7 transactions a second, this one can do a million. And but that doesn't necessarily make better money. In fact, it doesn't make better money. But you need other things to make money great, and Bitcoin checks a lot of those boxes in a way that nothing else does in the world right now. So that's the big story to me. If I were to talk, and I do talk to, I talk to a lot of billionaires and influential people, and sometimes it's only appropriate to talk for a few minutes about it. I might have 30 seconds. I don't want to dominate it with talking about Bitcoin, but that's the thing that I emphasize is money. I don't talk about like, oh, here's a cool thing you can get it on your coffee. That's what I did talk about in 2013. But now I'm right to the money thing. What's going on? Look at fiat. What do you think about this money printing? And then I talk about the Bitcoin narrative, and I talk about the serious players that in the serious things that are going on.
Yeah, it's funny. Some of those things, like the concept of hyper-Bitcoinization in like 2016 and 17, when I was talking to some institutional people about it, that was something I would be reluctant to bring up. I always thought in the back of my mind that that's a possibility and very interesting, but it was so kind of crazy to talk to an institutional investor about that you would self-censor and not bring it up. But now I've seen guys from like Morgan Stanley Asset Management writing about that. And then
Yeah.
yesterday, we had JPOW talking about, hey, there could be room for more than one reserve currency out there. So these things that were crazy to think about, sovereign adoption is another one of them. Like I didn't think that would happen last year. I thought it was way too early. But Bitcoin has a way of outperforming your expectations and for things moving faster than you could think possible.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's so amazing to have seen it. It is so much faster and so much more scale than you kind of think it's going to happen. But yeah, the timing has been amazing.
Moving on to like the thoughts around digital securities and programmable money. What do you think is the opportunity there? Because I've always felt like that capital markets, the technology is it's one of those industries it's probably the industry that's been most reluctant to upgrade its technology in a meaningful way. So what do
Right.
you think is the opportunity for digital securities and things like STOs?
I think it's really exciting. I've been a big believer of it. Yeah, maybe I was the first fan. I mean, I since day one, this has been my thing. The minute I got into Bitcoin, I was like, well, how can this work for my industry for securities? I grew, as I mentioned, I traded my first stocks when I was 7. I've been registered now for 29 years, and so it's in my blood, and I have, I'm always interested in a way to make stocks work better. And obviously, money is a big piece of stocks. You talk about buying a coffee. Uh, stocks are the mother of all industries. Securities are the mother of all industries. It's trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars. If you count all the securities, including debt securities, it's like $300 trillion. I mean, it's a bunch of the world's money. And just plain old equities, which is wonderful. Equities are businesses. I mean, who doesn't believe in businesses? Businesses are even more important than money, because there's always going to be different kinds of money, but businesses are businesses right now. Money's more important because we happen to be in this hopefully hyper-bitcoinization kind of monetization Cantillon effect sort of thing. But overall, usually money is supposed to be boring. Hopefully in 10 years, Bitcoin will be at a high level and just kind of stay there and nobody will really care. It'll be like, hey, we're going doing our businesses. But equities are wonderful, and equities represent everything, even real estate and collectibles now. There's all kinds of things that you can put, any structure that's a corporation that owns something is an equity. So if you can make that work better, even if it's just for settling it, we want to think forward to, what do things look like in a Bitcoin world? What do they look like several years from now when Bitcoin is kind of won, and presumably you're going to have a lot of global securities settling in Bitcoin, just like you have altcoins all settle in all of them settle in Bitcoin. If you had, those are instruments. I just happen to think almost all of them are low quality instruments, but you could have the same kind of activity with high quality instruments. There's no reason those altcoins couldn't be security shares that are good companies that are growing, companies that are making money, that represent all kinds of businesses, large and small. So if you can make that work better and you make those securities settle in Bitcoin, I think that's just a natural thing. And that will kind of globalize our securities markets and democratize them and spread them out a bit more. And it also, just like Bitcoin itself, it eliminates a lot of the need for most of the intermediaries. The big difference with securities is there's always going to be one party you trust, which is the company, like Apple, but you're not that worried about like Apple stealing your shares. You're worried about other things. But if you can, right now, to buy Apple shares, you have many intermediaries between you. In a Bitcoin world, if you have tokenization of securities, you should be able to just buy those securities right from Apple, just like you used to in the very old days, pre-Apple. Maybe the early days of GE or something, but you would, they did have shares. You'd just go and buy the shares and you had the paper shares. Even when I was a kid, they still had paper shares. So there's no reason they couldn't issue that, shares in the form of a token. Paper is obviously very clunky and it just a million drawbacks, but you can solve those things with a token. So a token on something like Liquid is just a wonderful idea. So I think it can change the whole world. If you make securities work better, you make the capital markets work better. You could see tens of thousands of companies trading, even companies that are very illiquid, companies that are not. They're not that interesting to investors. A lot of VCs don't want to invest in certain things. There's a lot of good companies that don't make money, but some people say like, "Oh, I love that bed and breakfast. I know they don't make any money, but I love it, and I had my honeymoon there, and I'm happy to be a shareholder." No VC is going to invest in that unless it's a personal thing. But you could broaden cap tables and have a lot more participation and a lot more ways for people to exit and make money and have liquidity on their holdings. So it's a great overall thing, I think.
Yeah, I think it's interesting too, is that we've got the Bitcoin trading world, like all of that infrastructure, exchanges like Bitfinex, and that we've got this proof of concept of a platform and this ecosystem that could handle billions of dollars, tens of billions of dollars of trading every day, 24/7, 365. And then you've got the legacy system where, I'm in Taiwan, which is an extreme example. Our equities market here trades 9 until 1:30, right? 5 days a week, not on weekends, not during Chinese New Year's. So you're living in this world where you've got like horse and carriage, and then you've got Teslas.
Right.
but the horse and carriage people get to tell the Tesla people how they should be doing things, right? So it's such an interesting disconnect. And I think we're at the point now where we're like, we've got something valuable over here that the legacy world can consider and implement. And then my other comment would be like some of the existing players like the JP Morgans of the world. I always find it fascinating that the thing that they see interesting in Bitcoin and blockchain technology is that they can fire their whole back office, right? So for them, this is a technology to like fire people and improve their profit margins, which I always think is hilarious.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's certainly been fun to watch what the major firms have done, and I feel good sometimes because I think a lot of them don't get the narrative. I mean, it's about better money. That's the real story. That's the real story.
Yeah, that was the funniest thing of like kind of the 2015, 2016 era, is that it was very popular to talk about blockchain, but Bitcoin was still very taboo, right? So if you were in a bank and you wanted to be edgy, you'd be like, how can we implement this blockchain technology? But Bitcoin is for kind of like Silk Road drug dealers,
Hmm.
and they never really got it.
Yeah.
I think maybe they're starting to now from an investment perspective, but they're I think I was part of that at our bank at Macquarie. We were looking at that, and it's just like struggling to find, to bash a round peg into a square hole. Like
Oh yeah.
there weren't that great of applications.
Yeah, I had meetings in those days when I went to meetings, and people would take me aside and say, don't mention Bitcoin, just talk blockchain. They don't want to talk about Bitcoin; they want to talk blockchain." And I'd say, "Well, that is a blockchain.
Yeah.
It's the best blockchain." No, 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 they don't like it.
So in terms of developments like in STOs and digital securities, I'm curious to hear what's coming out of the US, because from my perspective, it seems like all of the action has really been focused in kind of smaller economies that are really hungry for growth. So Bitfinex Securities, where the Blockstream mining note recently started secondary trading, just started trading this week actually. That's regulated out of Kazakhstan. There's a framework reportedly coming from El Salvador. There have been some like really strong financial centers like Singapore and Hong Kong that have been really, relatively proactive in this space. But what's going on your side? Like, is there stuff happening in the US, or is all of this action going to take place outside of the US?
I think there's some things happening in the U.S., and I think that the U.S. is still the largest market for this, and it is one of the most conservative markets. It's looked at actually favorably by a lot of other countries because they feel like it's quite strict. And our markets are pretty clean relative to a lot of others in terms of corruption and things like that. Um, but they do have some problems, as the SEC chair kind of alluded to just yesterday in an interview. There are some challenges, and I think we are a bit behind. We should do a lot more, but it is possible to do things, and there has been some big moves. Securities in the U.S. have probably changed more in the last year than the last 10 years, which is, I'm not jumping for joy over it. I think we still need more to go. But like we improved Reg CF offerings. We increased that. You can now raise up to $5 million from non-accredited investors, and you can, if you set it up properly, but once you set it up properly, which is not that hard, you could raise the money right on Twitter. You can solicit it. They don't have to be accredited. It's a much easier process. It has to be done a certain way through either a portal or a registered broker dealer. They also raised the limits on Reg D and Reg A to 10 million and 75 million. So, and they've approved a couple tokenized securities, and there's also a couple exchanges and others that are working on this. So it is progressing quite well. I wish it was faster. I always feels like it's around the corner, and then sometimes the time goes on, I think it's even further. I'm 100% convinced that it's just inevitable. There's no way that Gen Z is going to be in a Bitcoin economy in a decade, and they're going to be sitting around monkeying with DTCC, you know, days and days and days to move securities around. It just won't work. That what you just mentioned about how these crypto exchanges work so well, that a lot of crypto people don't realize how much further advanced Bitcoin and crypto is compared to the legacy markets. The idea that you can buy, you can have Bitcoin or you can have a token of some sort on, Kraken and move it from country to exchange in a matter of hours in many cases, that just doesn't exist in the regular world. You can't even move from Merrill Lynch to Morgan Stanley next door in the same city in the United States. It takes 10 days or a week. It's very, very slow.
Yeah.
Nothing's done in hours, and it could be. We have the technology. We know it's there. You know for sure when you send your Litecoin from Kraken to Coinbase, it's there. It's there. Nobody argues about it. They don't have to. They don't have to have the ops department call. Hey, Kraken, did you send those Litecoin over? That's what the old system does. The old system, they have to reconcile this. They have to use trusted parties in between because none of the brokers trust each other. It's a big clunky mess, and it's nobody's fault. Anybody who designed it is probably long dead. It's a system that's been kind of built on things from the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, and they've just kind of kept building because you could never shut it down and restart it. But now we have something that truly is better. And it is one of the other very rare use cases. We all know that blockchain's overhyped and stuff, but one of the other rare use cases of this type of technology is to solve this kind of variation of the Byzantine generals problem, where you have parties that don't trust each other to run a ledger. And that's what you have in the real securities markets, not a startup with a cap table on their Excel, but the big companies, Tesla and Microsoft and Google and Facebook and Apple. All their shares are managed in a complex way because you have many brokers who are all having shares that they don't disclose to the other brokers. So nobody has a complete ledger. They have to trust a single party. They don't trust the company with the ledger because the ledger, they wouldn't even let the company know. They don't want Apple to know who owns their shares. But the Apple doesn't manage that anyway. So it's another party, DTCC in the United States, and that is a very complex and clunky system. There's just lots of weird moving parts, and things don't make sense, and it takes days and days to do things. And if there's problems with title or some company goes out of business, things can go haywire. You have situations like 140% of AMC and GME being shorted when it didn't, shares that don't even exist. And Dole Foods got acquired and more people came forward with shares than they thought existed. So this does solve real problems, and it's just inevitable. Like I said, in a kind of a Gen Z world, Bitcoin world, of course it's going to be digital. Of course it's going to be digital, because right now it's kind of like practically paper slash Excel, and we know that we can do better than that. Bitcoin is going to demand that things settle for it. Digital things are going to settle in Bitcoin. So I think it's inevitable. So I'm super excited about some of the things that's going on with Blockstream and some of the other leaders in this area.
Yeah, it's always struck me too as a really interesting, one of the few really useful applications of this technology, I think. And so I'm really interested to know, like, what other interesting assets are you seeing being tokenized? Because part of my job is getting the BMN listed on different platforms, looking for different security token platforms, and there's really not that many out there. Certainly, not any, I don't think, that have any significant amount of scale. Like probably Bitfinex Securities is, I think, the leader, just because they've got such a captive pool of investors with Bitfinex. But there's not that many platforms out there, and I don't think there's not that many interesting assets that have been issued to date. So what other kind of like interesting things are you seeing?
Yeah, it's still early. And because a lot of the regulatory reasons and other things like that, it is very early. You have INX and ARCA, which both have fully registered public entities, which are tokenized. So that's exciting, and that shows that these are possible, that you can do, sort of, you can do them. There's still some snags. There's a lot of sort ofs in this space. You can't just do some of the stuff. And it's new, so it's harder to onboard. I think you're going to need like some super high quality company, like or just a well-known company like a Tesla or something like that. If they said, hey, we're tokenizing some shares, I think that would be a big deal. I mean, because of course people will buy them, and of course they have value. And it could be somebody from our own space. Maybe we get Strike or somebody like that to do it, and I think that would be the most exciting. There's no shortage of companies looking for money, but especially early, I think it's kind of important for it to be, at least a high quality, or at least a successful kind of offerings. So we've been pretty cautious. We haven't done any, even though we love this space. I would have loved to do some a couple of years ago. We've had licenses for, our licenses are kind of evolving, but we probably could have done some of this earlier. But yeah, you're right. There's just not a ton of high quality, deals out there. But inevitably, I think that'll, it's just better technology. So it's just like, a lot of companies didn't have websites a long time ago, and they weren't sure if they were going to do it or not. But once I think there's going to be some tipping point, and part of it'll be the exchanges also. Um, but with Bitcoin, will bring it along naturally, I think.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think the big kind of things that have bottlenecked the STO industry and the idea of STOs have been, number one, regulatory frameworks. Like that's been slow to develop, and now we're starting to get those to develop in different jurisdictions. And then the second one is assets that investors want, and I think we're just starting that phase too, right? So we need interesting things that are modelable and palatable to a wide range of investors. I think, to me, the Blockstream mining node is probably one of the first of those things, because it's natively Bitcoin, And there's so much interest in Bitcoin mining that it's one of those kind of assets that can pull people in from traditional markets and make them go through all the hassle to figure out how to invest and how to custody this thing and how to put money into it.
Mhm.
And then I think we talked about this last week with Paulo from Bitfinex as well. As I think things like the El Salvador Bitcoin bond are going to be massively exciting, and will pull in all kinds of investors as well.
Yeah. Yeah, we're working on we certainly hope that we're going to be able to do that in the United States. You know, it's another regulatory hurdle. We've been talking to the regulators about it, and we're working on it. I'm not sure if we'll be able to, but you know, eventually El Salvador is unique in some respects, you know, partly because they have a low credit rating, and there's some specific SEC regulations about low credit rating. If Germany did this tomorrow, we would, I don't want to say definitely, nothing's definite, but I'm almost positive we wouldn't have a problem, offering it in the U.S. So part of it is unique to El Salvador because of their credit rating. But you know, again, you're just gonna, of course, there's gonna be early, you know, countries that try this. It's natural that it's going to be, something a little bit harder, like El Salvador. But hopefully they pave the way.
Wait, those are the people that need it, right?
Right, exactly, and I think you're going to see some other Latin America countries next. I'm really interested in the Middle East. I used to live out there, so I'd love to see some of the Middle Eastern countries do this. But I think hopefully it's inevitable. Hopefully we're going to see more and more of this, and you're going to see, and those are those are tokenized securities. So every time something does this and brokers handle it or investors handle it, it pushes it forward. It's like, okay, here's another case study that this is done, and here's how it worked. And you solve the issues are not trivial. I talked to a lot of people from outside securities, and they have very worthy kind of cypherpunk ideals of like, oh, just tear it all down and do a new thing. It's not quite that simple, because there is a lot of stuff that sort of you need to have work in the world, especially like rich people, they have things in trusts and stuff. So they don't want to have something on a Trezor. There's just different things that people have that are realities that we deal with. But every time something like this, like the El Salvador bond or something else comes forward, we all learn, we all hopefully push it forward. And that's worked so far. I think it's inevitable that we're going to have this be mainstream. So somebody's got to be a pioneer.
Yeah, I think the other missing component that's really important is retail participation as well. And to me, that was one of the really exciting things about ICOs, although it developed to be a complete shit show. But the interesting thing was like that concept of the democratization of finance, where more people can invest in these things that used to be siloed off and harder to get money into. And I guess in hindsight, it's a good thing that they're harder to get money into. But also the trading volume, right? Like if you can get to get decent liquidity and trading volume, you need retail. I think that's a huge part of the value proposition. And then the ability to open up some of these things to global liquidity pools is part of the value add, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that I'm really excited about unlocking existing assets. Like Rally Road does some interesting stuff with collectibles. They'll take like an old Corvette or a Babe Ruth's baseball bat or LeBron's jersey or something like that, and they'll make it a corporation. That's a corporation that only owns one asset, and then they tokenize it. And those things have value. And I'd like to see that more with kind of everything of value. And real estate. Real estate's a really natural one, because that's um, real estate is always high quality in the sense that it's a real thing. You can certainly lose on real estate, but it's very different than doing like a DeFi token or something like that. Real estate is much more tangible and real, and tends to move with inflation, as we're seeing right now. And if it's good quality real estate and you avoid some of the real basic problems, and also if it's tokenized, you avoid some of the issues with debt or getting in over your head or something. You can just buy it outright and tokenize it, and then everybody owns a little piece of it, and you have exposure to that asset. That's just a great idea. It makes a lot of sense. So I'm excited about a lot of those things coming down the pipeline.
Yeah, and I think that counterintuitively, there's probably a lot of interest in our space, which is the Bitcoin crypto space, which is naturally very high volatility. I think there's a lot of interest in this space in low volatility assets. So if you can tokenize these low volatility assets and improve liquidity and make them lower friction, I think that becomes really, really interesting. If you could go between your high volatility and your low volatility assets relatively painlessly, that's extremely powerful.
Yeah, and it opens up doors for people. I have a farm in New Hampshire that we don't plan on ever selling, but wouldn't it be interesting if somebody had a farm like that and they said, I'm going to tokenize 20% of it? And you could put right in the perspective, say, hey, we don't plan on selling, but somebody could still have exposure to that. So you could kind of have liquidity on something. I mean, it opens up a lot of doors. People can finance things in a different way. Closely held businesses can reward their shareholders and kind of get liquidity and sell things over time. It's just if you can make the equity move around better, it really does open up a lot of new opportunities. We're already starting to see that. There's a lot of even aside from tokenization, some of this stuff like Reg CF, that's not token specific, or certainly not Bitcoin specific. That's just kind of an evolution in the securities business. So the time is right now that securities are going through a change. Like I said, it's too slow probably, but it's just inevitable with Bitcoin changing money. The biggest thing in money is securities. There's nothing that comes close to the volume and size and importance of securities. It's just no other industry is even close. So it's going to be natural that Bitcoin works with that. So I think these hard assets, low volatility kind of stuff. And it's interesting because historically, those have been some of the least exciting things for Wall Street. Nobody wants to just buy New Hampshire farmland that say, okay, here's 100 acres in New Hampshire. We're going to sell 10,000 shares at whatever, $10 a share, whatever its value is. And, nobody's interested in that. VCs don't care about that, but there's trillions and trillions of dollars in those kind of assets, and they're good assets. You're not going to get a 20x on your farmland, but you're also probably not going to lose it all. So, same with some of my best clients that I've had as an investment advisor, kind of pre Bitcoin, were people that owned these boring, weird industries, ball bearing grease manufacturers and, people who sell aluminum shaping machines and stuff. And these businesses that, I knew these owners were making $5 million a year off these businesses doing 10, 15, 20 million in sales. Those are good businesses. No VC cares about that, but they're still a good business. So you could unlock that value. It's trillions of dollars. So I'm excited about a lot of those opportunities. I just think it's going to be very exciting for everybody.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And that has been kind of my pitch to the regulators here in Taiwan is that we've got 1,800 listed companies. Most of them have no volume. The founders only ever took them public because that was a popular thing to do at one point, but they've got high dividend yields. And like you say, they're widget makers. They make, plumbing elbows or ball bearings or something like that. And if you could improve that liquidity so it's global, I think there's a lot of interest in a company that has like a 5-7% dividend yield. Just because it's stable and it's got a good business and it's a low volatility asset with decent return, especially in this day and age.
Yeah, it's a great way to diversify your portfolio. And I think a lot of, from a portfolio management standpoint, we talked to a lot of Bitcoiners. I think a lot of Bitcoiners, the idea of taking, if somebody has made, bunches of life changing money in Bitcoin, the idea of taking a little piece of that off the table and having something like, a portfolio of some extremely conservative real estate, not leveraged, nothing exciting, not spec construction, but just like existing stuff that has cash flows or maybe doesn't even have cash flows, just kind of diversifying a little bit and all the other different kinds of equities. And with more opportunities coming, you're going to be able to buy, hopefully, El Salvador bond and, stuff in Taiwan and everything. The economy should be global, just like crypto is global. The worst token has advantages over Disney and Tesla. Disney and the junkiest ERC20 token can do stuff that Disney and Tesla can't do. And that just doesn't make sense. That doesn't make sense. You should be able to send your Disney. I should be able to send you Disney in Taiwan on my phone, just like I could send you Litecoin. Yeah, I could send you Litecoin right now and you'd have it immediately. But if I wanted to, I'm a financial advisor who owns a broker dealer, and I don't even know how to send you Disney in Taiwan. It'd take us 6 weeks to get you one share of Disney. That's absurd. There's just no way the world's going to work like that. Especially with the younger generation, Gen Z goes down my kids' generation. They're not going to tolerate that.
Yeah, definitely. And in terms of how things like STOs and digital securities are issued and put on protocols, do you think this is a slightly loaded question? Do you think there's any advantage to issuing these things on top of Bitcoin through technologies like Liquid versus doing it on Ethereum or other platforms. At the moment, most of the STO industry seems to be set up for ERC20.
Yeah, that's a great question for me. I'm also biased. I really like Liquid. We were the first broker dealer to sign on to Liquid, uh, but I'll caveat that by saying,
That's why I asked you the question.
yeah. Well, I I've always I'm not that smart, especially about technology. But I'm smart enough to know that Bitcoin is a really strong chain, and I'm smart enough to see the decentralization risks and other risks in protocols like specifically Ethereum, which is the big leader now. And one thing I will say for Ethereum is they have fostered a culture of building, and it's very inviting for whatever reason. And the more building creates more building. You have a lot of firms and things and stuff that all invest. And I think that there's a lot of Bitcoiners working on building that size of ecosystem, but in a healthier way, without some of the drawbacks. And, so, there has certainly been, Ethereum has had its share of scams for sure. And I don't know, if Bitcoin works really well as the chain, it probably will have a bunch of scams, because if you have, suppose I could press a button and say, I want 5,000 new issuances next month, and all on Liquid and all through Watchdog. Well, probably a couple of them be scams. I mean, it's just like what if you had 50,000? 50,000, you'd definitely have some scams. No matter how hard we work to do due diligence, you'd have something slip through. So, maybe scams are inevitable, but I think Bitcoin can kind of learn from the lessons of what has worked and not worked in Ethereum, and hopefully build a stronger and healthier system. And just securities in general are healthier than these kind of pseudo fake securities, illegal securities, whatever, that don't, you have instruments that don't really have terms. So that's that was supposed to be my positive thing about Ethereum. It ended up being that positive. The negative is the things like the DAO, the DAO reversal, and some of these centralization and scaling issues. And clearly, I think everybody agrees. Even the biggest fan of other chains would agree that Bitcoin is a very, very, very strong and stable chain. If you go and look at like a New York Bit Devs meeting, and you sit in there and you listen to John Newberry going through slides or something, and you don't think that Bitcoin's secure, I can't help you. I mean, it's very clear and obvious that Bitcoin is a really strong chain. I don't think, people may say they like something better than Bitcoin or something's faster or whatever, but you can't really deny that there's a lot of eyeballs and a lot of security behind Bitcoin, and everything about Bitcoin is focused on the security. So for me, like I said, I'm not that smart, but I feel like you got to build a house on a solid foundation. We have enough things to worry about. I don't want to get a call at 2 a.m. saying, "Oh yeah, Bruce, we lost half the firm because the chain broke." Well, I mean, that's a lot less likely with Bitcoin. So I just had this sort of philosophy going back uh, 4 or 5 years that just sort of said, "Oh, this is a stronger chain, therefore we should build on that." I actually got that idea from Nick Szabo, and right around when Rootstock first came out, when it was called Rootstock, now it's called RSK, and I invested in that, and I had heard about it. Nick Szabo had written about it and talked about it, and he kind of said, "Oh, this is cool," and building on Bitcoin, and I just as a fairly non-technical person, I said, "Oh, that just seems to make sense." Things associated with this really, really strong chain that cares a lot about security seems to be building on a little bit better foundation. So I was interested in that, and interested in Jack Mazuko RGB, and then obviously very interested in Liquid. And if there's anything else that comes along on Bitcoin, I'd probably be interested in that, just because I really like and also anybody who's been around in this space a while, you've seen enough volatility. I got enough volatility, enough things to worry about. I'm cool with, I mean, Bitcoin's like, that's enough for me. I don't need to take extra risks. I do feel like there's a stability. It's like, be on team Bitcoin. You kind of can't go wrong. I'm very sympathetic. I love experiments. I don't love experiments that take money, but I do love experiments, and I love stupid ideas and go for it and try things. And I've got a lot of friends, in all kinds of different projects. But I just personally feel like Bitcoin is really, really secure. And if you look at like what a lot of the prominent Bitcoiners talk about, like a lot of the Blockstream folks, they talk about security a lot. they don't talk about bells and whistles as much. They talk about
Yeah.
security, and so to me, it's that foundational construction of, when we built a house, it was all about, like, you got to get the plumbing and the electrical and everything right, the basics first. I think there's a natural fit, and I think also some of these chains are just going to fail. They're just going to be junk. Um, but I think there's going to be a natural fit for things that settle in Bitcoin to be built on Bitcoin. There'll probably be multiple chains. I kind of hope there will be, because I feel like, competition is good. And I always felt like Bitcoin's primary use case has always got to be the money. So if there's ever a trade off of where it's going to be better for security or better for securities or security, I think you should choose security. And I'm sure the Bitcoin developers would. There's no way that they're going to have some BIP that says, hey, Bruce wants to make this securities thing so that it's easier for us. And it's any security risk. That's never going to go through on Bitcoin. Whereas some other chain, they prioritize it. It's possible. But, I think that Bitcoin is a really, really good bet to build on. I'd love to see more building. I'd urge more companies to build. You need a lot in this. You need a lot of service providers and lawyers and different things like that. There's only so much that a few
Yeah.
companies can do. So, but yeah, I mean, that's why I support, that's why we were the first to support, liquid of broker dealers. That's why, that's our primary goal, is to, we'll probably support any, I mean, especially if something like a Tesla comes along, we would support any, even if they issued it on Doge, we would try to support that, because we believe in free markets, even though I think it would be terrible to issue it on Doge, and I don't like Doge at all. But if it's a security, and it's a large company like Tesla that investors want, we're going to try and give investors whatever they want. But I would prefer, if Tesla called us and asked for advice, we would definitely tell them to build, build on Bitcoin, and certainly liquid is the obvious choice there. So hopefully others will see that. And I think that overall building on Bitcoin is a great idea.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great answer. And I think 2021 was a pretty good year to kind of highlight how resilient Bitcoin is, because essentially you had a nation state level attack on Bitcoin by the second largest economy in the world, right? Like China flat out banned it and kicked all the miners out, and we had a dip in hash rate. But other than that, it just kept on going, right? And really very minimal impact. So I think that was a massively interesting data point.
Yeah, totally. And you see that, and you see the narrative that folks like Michael Saylor and Nidig talk about, which is about this, big, serious technological achievement. You listen to Ross Stevens or something like that, or you read Safeteen's book, or, any of the kind of like classic, super Bitcoiny things right now. It's all about this, very, very strong, uh, piece of technology. So I think it's natural that people, if I was a CFO, or whoever's making a decision at some public company, I think it's natural to say, oh, okay, well, how's that chain doing? That seems to be a pretty strong chain. Can we build on that? It just seems to make sense. And there's a lot of believers in Bitcoin believe that, the externality costs of blockchains are kind of all the same, and you're going to end up with it being like one. It'll be, TCP/IP kind of thing. I don't know if I believe that or not, but it doesn't really matter. You can all win. I mean, Ethereum could do a 10x, and Bitcoin could do a 100x. Everybody can still, everybody can win. I mean, especially with something like securities. And that's why I almost say, I kind of hope there's going to be competition, because it's sort of too big for any, you don't really want any one sort of protocol to have like all the money in the world, all the money and all the securities. It's such a massive, massive thing. And there may be specialties too. There may be, a Sharia compliant chain, or something that just works really well with the, oil and gas, or it's super optimized. I met somebody one time, and at first I thought it sounded like a really dumb idea, but then I listened to them and it kind of made sense. But it was optimized for, one very specific kind of use case. They were launching a new blockchain. I'm like, oh boy. And then they told me, and I'm like, oh, there could be something, maybe there's something with only 100 members, the Islamic Development Bank, and they want to do a Sharia compliant thing,
Yep.
between these member states, where there's only like 55 members or something like that. um who's just, who knows? I mean, that could be a multi-trillion-dollar thing. You could have very, very niche sort of chains and different things that could make sense. So I'm open-minded to that, but I think that, you're going to have I'm also very convinced that you're going to have one, really, really big, strong chain, and that's going to be Bitcoin. I mean, that's what I bet on. you know, uh, I want to take as little risk as possible, and I think that's the best bet.
Yeah. So, last question. Looking forward in 2022, what are the things happening in Bitcoin that kind of get you the most excited? What are like the big milestones you're looking for, or anything that's you find particularly interesting?
Boy, that's a moving target. I mean, it would change this week because now I'm interested in, unfortunately, what kind of fight it's going to be. You had Hillary Clinton and Elizabeth Warren both yesterday saying you got to cut down on crypto exchanges. So it's coming. And, there's a good chance that Russia could use Bitcoin or start trading oil in Bitcoin. I mean, that could get real dicey real quick. Bitcoin might not be strong enough, although it's great that we flexed with these recent um, congressional fights and things like that, because it showed that there is a lot of us and that we're influential and we care and it matters. So
Yeah.
hopefully it's far enough along. And also you have big publicly traded companies like Coinbase. So hopefully it's far enough along where they don't say, oh my gosh, Russia, Bitcoin's a felony now. You can't have it. I think it's hopefully too far along for that to happen. But you could have things less dramatic than that, where they just start, really ramping up tracking and OFAC. And, I hope they don't do something stupid like, say, have good coins and bad coins. Any coin used by this person to buy oil or whatever is a bad thing. Um, so that's something I am watching. Unfortunately, I wish I wish it was something better. But this overall, like what we started with, this geopolitical kind of overall shift in how the world works and how the world looks. That's what I'm interested in, where Bitcoin fits into that narrative. The thing I would be most excited about in the whole world is the Middle East. That's a place that's very important to me, and I lived there, and I care a lot about it. And it's very, very important in the world, and always has been. And it's had its share of problems, but I think Bitcoin is, really, really key for that part of the world. And I would love to see one of those countries, really adopt Bitcoin in a meaningful way. I think that actually would help world peace and a lot of other things. I think it's sort of a natural fit. So that, and I don't know if that'll happen this year or whatever. I wouldn't have thought, like you said, I wouldn't have thought El Salvador was going to happen. I thought that was going to be years away. But all it takes is a couple people to do something, and the whole world can change. And we're in a place now where we can all be part of writing history. There's people right in our circles that made this thing happen, and there's people that can make the next things happen. I'm going to try and make some things happen. It's though anything is up for grabs in this time of crazy, chaotic change. Anybody can start a business. Anybody can do things. You can reinvent yourself. You can reinvent a new thing. All these power structures that are failing are being replaced. CNN is replaced by Joe Rogan. The IMF and the World Bank are going to be replaced. So people can step in and make the change, be part of the change. So I'm really excited about that. I think we can all be catalysts, and I hope that we're going to see these kind of changes in the next year. I think it's certainly going to be a very interesting and historical and exciting year.
Yeah. Exciting. Hopefully not too exciting.
Right.
Especially living in Taiwan.
Yes, for
So
sure.
where can people go to learn more about you and what you're doing?
Um, I'm on Twitter, Bruce Fenton, and my name is Bruce Fenton, Fenton, and that's my domain name, brucefenton.com. I'm usually pretty easy to find. I have to get a little bit better about like kind of having some sort of organized way for people to follow me or something. I haven't done a blog in a while, but I'd like to do more of that kind of stuff. And I'm going to be getting more active into, politics and this kind of thing, because the world is in tough shape right now. And I've been kind of private for the last couple of years. Didn't do a lot of interviews and things like that, but I feel like I've got to get out there and speak out and do more. I'm going to be investing in some different advocacy efforts and things like that, because, we've got to fight for this world. We got to fight for freedom and what's right. And, we kind of have no choice. We are in very, very historic times, and we can't sit on the sidelines. We might as well write history in the way that we hope is the right way for peace and prosperity for everybody.
Yeah, I agree. That couldn't agree more. So that's a great place to wrap it up. Thanks for your time today, Bruce. And I look forward to doing it again.
Thanks so much, Jesse. It was really great. Look forward to it.